I'm generally the quiet one, so I like to just sit and listen to everybody else. But every now and then I have to sort of stand up or semi-stand up. But I think that, my sort of backstory is quite important around the relativity of deciding to do what ended up being, very importantly, 21 and a half days water over fast. I've been pretty much an elite athlete most of my life, competing in a number of different sports over many decades. I'm now in my 70s, so. And through that, back in the day, way back in the day, we thought we could eat anything we liked because we were running, cycling, everything, swimming. So it didn't really matter. We used to have like Mars bars cut into strips, taped onto the crossbar of the bike, and you pull one off and you'd eat a small piece of Mars bar while you're cycling 56 miles if it's a half Ironman. But anyway, so having that sort of background through school, I literally won, I think, just about every school sports activity going, which doesn't make you very popular, so I had a bit of an inferior thing, because I just loved the sports. It didn't matter. It was about my ability performing in it, not really anybody else's. And I guess that's where a lot of my quietness comes from, is just staying under the radar. But obviously through that, I got involved very much with lifestyle, both as a health and as a lifestyle medicine. And I did actually become one of the founders of the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine. And I am a regional director for them. So I have, over 3 decades, in all honesty, of history with where we could perhaps use a person's style of living in relation to changing certain things relative to their health. So I've kind of come up that way. I've coached nationally, internationally. I've got national teams ready for World, European and team championships. So I thought I knew a lot about, glycogen, muscle glycogen, if that rings a bell to anybody. We can play with muscle glycogen even back then, more than 2 decades ago, even though most of the people we were speaking to in the world of British sports and athletics back then are absolutely clueless. But it was when Loughborough was just starting to come together and sports science was coming together. So I absolutely dived into sports science as it began to evolve here in the UK. And look where it is nowadays, especially any football people in here, although I'm not that keen on football, mainly because of the way we were treated initially, trying to get them to realise they're going to have to become elite athletes in the modern game. There's no more turning up absolutely wrecked out of your head for a match on a Saturday. So I did serve for 9 years with the British Army, but I must say as a medic. So I was a Royal Army Medical Corps medic, and I served for 9 years. I think the reason for that is, that they can be very challenging environments, and they're challenging to a degree that most people perhaps couldn't quite get their head round, not in any real serious way, I don't think. And then Neil and I's work, I have had a passion for working with some of the most difficult people that are not supposed to be thinking about changing anything. I ought to perhaps just say about Manchester's youth gang scene. This is over 20 years ago. I decided, because no one else could deal with them, they tried to get them into some kind of educational programme, and all they would do is either spit in the face of whoever was set the classroom up and had pens and little booklets and stuff. So it continually failed. And so I decided to set up an alternative education programme called the AIM Project, Alternatives in Mind. So it touches a little bit on a lot of the things Chris has talked about. Alternatives in Mind. Nobody thought it would last 9 minutes of the first session. They had more bouncers with them, 11 young people off Moss Side in Manchester. It doesn't come anymore, gang scene related, in the UK, let alone London. as to Moss Side in Manchester. And so the first cohort was 11, we tried to get 12, who actually turned up. And then obviously more minders would shake a stick at because they thought they'd either be trying to stab me up or whatever. But in actual fact, it became extremely successful and lasted for 9 years with 3 back-to-back Ofsted inspections, all outstanding. And obviously today's presentation isn't really about that. It's more about being able to think beyond what seemed almost impossible to be hit the ground running first time. And we were able to do that with the AIM project. So that involves IQ and not IQ. So IKEW, information gathering. You could argue once you've got lots of information. The K bit, which some of you might have guessed already, knowledgeable. Lots and lots of information, you could argue you're knowledgeable. And if you've got both of those, you could certainly say you must be educated in whatever information you gathered, wherever you became knowledgeable. Med school as an example in a minute. And then, you're educated. But in all honesty, that isn't really the case. Because you have to apply the W bit. Information gathered, you could argue you're knowledgeable. You could then say that you're educated. But you're none of those three until you go back to each one of them with the W bit. And so the W bit, some of you I think do know anyway, is wisdom. How do you tangibly get all the wisdom? I know there's a saying, the older you get, the wiser you get. And there is a lot of truth in that. Because I think with that comes experience, lived experience, which is what Neil and I are very much about. And obviously, So essentially, when you apply IKEW and you go and use the wisdom in each of the first 3, you'll see that it changes. And so by using that process with the Manchester Youth Gang scene, we were actually able to run for 9 years without any hiccups at all, really. So that said, Neil and I wanted to look at these very difficult groups who are older, maybe considerably even overweight, and have been going down this road every decade for probably 3 or 4 decades, where they're heavier on another med, heavier on another med, heavier on another med, and not able to really sort out if it is that they do want to sort something out, and most of them do, is just not being able to be successful at it. So we decided we need to look at fasting as a way and a means, and then how can we bring this into the IQ and not IQ, so the not I full stop, Q full stop, which is intelligence growth, where doctors do and are amongst the highest scoring IQ people out of all of the professions worldwide, every single year. They're always in the top 3. So they have a massive IQ. And yet 20-ish, well even 15, 20 years ago, almost a third of the educational programme for the medical students was out of date. It had no relevance today. So why would you spend so much time, when it's difficult enough going through that course anyway, teaching something that isn't even relevant? So there's no wisdom in that, is there? So it shouldn't have been in there. So that's IKW, IQ, and not I full stop, Q full stop. I'm going to show now, because I'm quite one, supposedly. Have any of you got a question you want to throw at me right now before we start to explain?
Yes,
please. Okay.
But my question to you, obviously, when you did this 21.5-day fast, is how did you cope with the stomach still making acid, waiting for food when the food did not arrive?
Okay. There is a chemical technical reason for that, which I will come to, and it is a part of what I need to do in this story. So I am going to answer it by the time we sort of go through this, and it'll unfold that question anyway. Anybody else got one they want to fire away?
Was it really just only water, or did you have other electrolytes as well?
No other real electrolytes, no. So it was very much water only. For the vast majority of it. I'll tell you about some of the things that we were trialling it, which is why we're quite... I was running out of places to take blood samples from by the time we got to the end. But the reason we did another half day was to look at another set of bloods. It's partly relative to whether we were influencing my blood glucose levels in any way. and we'll explain that in a minute. Any other bits?
Yeah, go on. I mean, it's extreme, 21.5 day fast. Did you build up to that? You know, are you an accomplished faster already? Or did you just go, hang on a minute, I ain't going to eat for 21.5 days?
That's a really good question, honestly. The only experience I had fasting-wise was militarily, where basically I had to survive above a snow line for up to 3 months, being hunted. When you said friendly forces, if they caught you, it wasn't good. You know, you were battered and thrown around and not good. So you definitely didn't want to get caught. So there were times where I couldn't eat, you know, because I built a hide and I couldn't come out the hide, quite often for days, because they decided it was going to camp.
Right.
This is many years back, many years ago. So there and a couple of other similar occurrences where, you know, I could go 2 and 3 days and not be able to eat anything. I did start to eat less food and drink slightly more water, but I wouldn't, you know, it was pretty minimal. So why do a long water only fast? I partly explained that in that Neil and I wanted to look at what changes were going on, whether we could make a long fast more palatable without it breaking the fast. That was the tricky bit. It would be nice if we could get more ordinary-ish kind of people in a very not good health state, and we're trying to change that. You know, if we could get them to go that long, which is part of what we were trying to find out, is it possible to make it more palatable? And one of the things that I'd been doing for 2 months prior to this was to use a blend, really, of an omega-3 oil. So there were a few other bits and pieces in there which had a total calorific value of just 80 calories. And I'd been on that every day for 2 months prior to starting the actual fast. Okay, so it's just 10 mils daily, a supplement, you know, around your omega-3 profiles. There are 11 main elements, of which the 2 we all know is omega-6 and omega-3s. Omega-6 not great, omega-3 is extremely good. But on a 3-to-1 ratio, so for every 1 omega-3, ideally you don't want more than 3 omega-6s. And the reason we got very interested in that was about, we are cellular beings, okay? I think it's 80 trillion cells in a human body. So every single one of those cells has a cell membrane. So we were interested in how can we have the best effect on cell membranes? And it turns out that it's within the omega profiles.
There is another important point though to mention here, that the reason why Graham was on the oil in the first place anyway.
Yes, 6 years ago in June, a road traffic accident, hit from behind. I was stationary, turning right, so I had 2 brake lights on, the indicator light on, and the car behind just drove straight into the back without even braking, till they actually hit the car. So the back of my head had hit the seat rest, and my lower back had gone into, like, the bottom of the seat where the folding bit is. So brain-wise, the worst part of it, really, well, the 3 areas. Maths, I'm probably still like a 10-year-old. It's really difficult. I know when you ask me a question in maths, I know how easy it is, but I can't figure it out really, unless I write it down and scribble a few times. So maths is really bad. That hasn't improved massively. But the one that is most difficult, and it's still very much there, but nothing like to the extent it was, is what's called cognitive function disorder. So I have to stay in this moment right now, or else I'll just be nowhere. I can come across like there is absolutely nothing wrong, but I had to get better and better at not allowing anything else remotely come from anywhere that might alter the way I'm thinking and trying to move forward. So I have to stay very much on this one thing. But the improvements with the oil, pretty much by the end of the first month, were getting very noticeable. And to be fair, these days it's pretty gobsmacking. I was pretty mind blown because, you know, the prognosis for me was if that brain injury between the 3rd and the 5th year doesn't improve, then that's what you need to get used to, that's what you need to put up with. It's a little bit like Chris's stories. So that's it, you just get used to where you're at and do the best out of that. And a bit stupidly, but in all honesty, I gave it the 3 to 5 years to try and improve, and it didn't. So this is when we were looking at how might we get improvements, and that's what led us to seeing if we could improve every single cell membrane, because your brain in a fairly confined space has got a massive amount of cells, for the area that's occupied. So yeah, that's the sort of route that we did. And now my typing, come tea time, was one finger, very slow, trying to get round. I can't believe how fast I'm typing in the evening now. That's just one simple example of it. So yeah, just that. Now, obviously, you do need to stay active, even though you're not consuming anything. So I would walk each day, around anywhere between about 1 mile and 2 miles. Initially, it was wonderful places like this, which has got to be good anyway. And it was very much like that when we were walking through, with all these colours. So walking, and the other one that I ended up doing quite a lot of, if you go to the next slide, was actually, we had a wood burner. We were 20, how long were we there?
Well, 21 days.
Yeah,
A bit more than that, actually.
Yeah, it was about 26, was it? Something like that.
Nice.
And we had a wood burner, so I was chopping logs and carrying logs and stuff. And in the first week and the second week, it was really very easy. I didn't notice any real difference. But in the 3rd week, I was beginning to realise that I couldn't work quite as long in that 3rd week. But I also noticed in the walks, if you go to the next slide.
Yeah, this was interesting.
So part of the walks we used to do were, through a village initially. But then as I'm this far in, sort of 2 weeks in, was to do the walks in a place where I might be tempted. So this was like meant to be, we thought, the torture zone. So, we went past fish and chippies, Thai restaurants. That's the only one where I had a brief moment of remembering, because my favourite is Thai food. And of course the Old English pub. And when we actually went down, I don't think, did we take that photo?
No, we didn't take that one.
Yeah, but there were loads of people all out having
This is
tasted
something,
lunches.
in case you don't recognise it, it's Hastings.
Yeah. So this was to test, basically, where is my head in this, right? And I'm going to come back to my head in this in a bit, because I was gobsmacked from probably the end of the first 2 days, I think. But walking through this and past all of these food and people eating, I never batted an eyelid. I didn't have any sort of thoughts as I could just eat, whatever. Well, fish chips and mushy peas would be in my pocket, I think. But no, this didn't happen, and we will touch on it.
And I think it's important just to throw in at that point. That was several days in. We did a walk around Tunbridge Wells about 3 or 4 days in, where Graham did notice a little more the stimulants and the smells and stuff. So there was a transition that happened between that and then longer, and we'll come back to that briefly.
Yeah.
Do you want to move on?
Yeah. We played with the use of the balance oil, this omega oil, at stages towards the back end, didn't we? Whereby, I wouldn't have any, and we looked against the data that we'd already collected on my blood glucose, and there were no shifts at all in that.
There was, I'm going to throw in here though, but there was something quite extraordinary. Graham's, as I said to you, Graham's had the car accident, and his mental functioning and everything was not great at one point, and I knew that, and I could tell the difference between 3 months, 4 months back and more recently. But when he withdrew the oil, I hadn't kind of twigged at first that he'd done that. But what I did notice was his interaction with me and his interaction with the day had shifted, i.e. he'd gone almost quiet inside himself, wasn't engaging, his eyes weren't engaged, he was struggling with what he was trying to do. We should say at this point, we were actually working quite cognitively that period of time because we were working on business type stuff. So it was not just straightforward doing nothing. We were physically, mentally working.
Very mentally.
Very much, absolutely. But at this time, I thought, I was worried. He then put the oil back in, and I kid you not, within a few hours, maybe 12 hours or something like that, I suddenly saw the lights come on again in a way that I thought, well, the only difference was the oil was coming in. It wasn't a calorie thing. It was nothing to do with that. You have to remember, and this is an insignificant part in terms of the nervous system for somebody like Chris as well, is the nerve fibres that go around your body. They're surrounded by fats, by myelin sheath, and if you don't have the good quality myelin sheath in there, it will interfere with the way that signals go around, and therefore it will stop you being able to do things. The balance oil with the right omegas was clearly having an impact to be able to help with that clarity, and it was amazing to see.
You also commented it, and I think I could sense it myself in my speech and clarity and the pace, because the pace at which, like I'm speaking now, I'd slowed, hadn't it?
Yeah, totally.
So there was a definite kind of shift, but very subtle.
And the other thing to mention is the water. This was really, really interesting. We both took good quality spring water with us, but I also took some water called acetive, and they produce this particular type of water which is alkaline. It's an alkaline water. And you've heard the idea that having alkaline water probably is very healthy and very good for you. When I started to drink it, because I sort of was playing with it, and I started within 12 hours, possibly a bit less, started to feel slightly nauseous. And then I carried on drinking with this water, and that sense of nauseousness just increased. So I thought, well, the only thing I've changed is that water. So I did a bit of diving into the research and explored it. When you're fasting like that, and you're only putting water into you, and you're putting in a pH of a high pH, which is alkali, the natural response of the body is to neutralize that. And therefore, that natural response is to produce acid into the system. And then that makes you feel sick. As soon as I changed it, that went quite soon.
Just coming back now to my journey through it, okay. I was pretty worried, I was thinking, militarily you try and find ways of cheating to do stuff that's pretty tough, to try and make it a bit easier, hiding food in places that they might not try and look for it, and because you're going to be stuck out in the sticks for however long. So, I'm partly thinking, am I going to put a stash somewhere just so I can nip out a meal? But no, I did, honestly, I did, just in case, because, I want to achieve whatever it is I think that I set myself, and I've been very good at that over a lot of years. But this, I was thinking, am I really going to do 21 days and just water only when it's hard work going past a Kit Kat in the supermarket? Or worse still, my worst one really is the ice creams in the little fridge thing that you lift the lid, and there's a whole tray of these Mars ice creams and all the other ones that are there. So I wasn't really looking forward to it, other than the science of it and the sort of, a genuine lived experience of it. I didn't dive too much into the science beforehand because I didn't want to cloud. I wanted to live the experience, and I never batted an eyelid once at any stage. Right at the beginning, in the middle, at the end, and everywhere in between. But there are changes which we'll touch on a little bit now that happen and occur when it is that you first of all enter into ketosis itself, which obviously militarily I had been in a few times because of certain circumstances, So I kind of get that, but I wasn't quite ready for the clarity of thought in your head, for one, the actual ease. I had no stage did I ever feel hungry. You know, that I could have just gone and got 3 pieces of malt bread with butter on it, or, you
Can I
know,
put lights on?
you can do, yeah.
There's a couple more
Yeah, oh,
slides.
go on. We'll go to the end.
Was that one you got?
Yeah, this was a little moment for me actually. That's fairly gradual, okay, as a climb. This was in week 3. I think we'd about 2 or 3 days left, I think, before the end.
Yeah.
So I knew I was getting towards the back end, but I was still going out doing the walks. They were slightly slower. They did feel slightly harder. Now, part of my background has been running up mountains as part of a half Ironman, for example. So you run up Pennygint and back down again. So you do a half marathon to the top of what is it? England's highest bit, is it? I think, whatever. But yeah, you run all the way up and you run all the way back down. By the time I walked to the top of this, right, my legs felt like I'd just run up Pennygint, having done a mile-and-a-half swim and 56 miles on a bike. My legs were like getting heavy and sort of, and it just reminded me very much of those feelings when you get towards the top of a long sort of mountainous road to the top, where your legs are pretty much on fire, you know. And this is the muscle glycogen, and you're obviously drawing from them. But I didn't have very much muscle glycogen left, so I understand that. So my legs were getting tired, even though I was only going up something pretty gradual. And I thought, oh man, that's the only time I got a little bit frosty with my situation. That's it.
Yeah. Oh,